What happened to me can be called real luck. I was on the verge of certain death. I committed a terrible sin for which I got what I deserved, and for several years I came to terms with my hopeless state. But then an event came into my life that helped me escape from the status of a victim. My marriage was ruined, but as it turned out, it wasn't just my fault. Enjoy watching. Revenge, when handled without caution, can have repercussions beyond the intended harm. In this case, both of us experienced irreparable damage, with no real winners. Our careless actions not only caused harm to each other, but also alienated those around us, making us appear in a negative light. Reflecting on it, I wouldn't have taken the same path if given another chance, but then again, maybe I wouldn't have married Karen either. Regardless, we now have to live with the consequences of our actions. The outcome left us both looking like fools, and I find myself questioning why I even went down that road. The second time it happened, I was caught off guard, particularly by a text message that my wife accidentally stumbled upon. Suddenly, I found myself in a difficult situation. Lisa, who was assigned as the editor for my children's books, had a certain allure that captivated me. Her tall, slender figure, intelligence, and incredible sensuality, despite not being a conventional beauty, drew me in. She was chosen by Russell and Jesse, the publishers, conveniently living in the same state. Our professional relationship involved monthly meetings to review my new work. Despite my seemingly unhappy marriage and dissatisfaction, I did love my wife Karen, and we had a beautiful daughter named Mary. We had been married for over 4.5 years, and Karen worked for a prominent accounting firm. We met at a bookstore, and our relationship blossomed quickly, leading to marriage. Karen, with her pleasant demeanor, stood at 168 centimeters tall, had dark brown hair, brown eyes, and a lovely figure. She was smart, not the typical dull accountant, and brought energy and vibrancy into our lives. It's puzzling why I would betray her. Our relationship started well, with Karen taking the initiative to move in together and eventually suggesting marriage. Despite having common interests, the path we took led to a complicated situation, and now we have to face the consequences. Partying until sunrise was our routine, and on this particular night, I finally drifted off to sleep just past midnight. Waking up at 4 a.m., I discovered she hadn't returned. By 7:00, I went to the bathroom, stumbling upon Karen half-dressed on the bed. She didn't stir until 2:00 in the afternoon. "Are you alive?" I asked, concerned. "I'm not sure," she groaned, admitting that she might be. Observing my disheveled state, she acknowledged that I must have had a great time. She cautioned me not to speak loudly, rushing to the bathroom where she spent an extended period vomiting. 2 days later, she was almost back to normal. 3 weeks later, we hosted a small ceremony with around 50 attendees, mostly close friends and family. Despite having done this before our marriage, I felt she had tried to party me to death in the initial weeks of our marriage and throughout the honeymoon. Her pregnancy didn't surprise me. I had found an empty test kit box in the trash, sans the test stick. Condoms weren't foolproof, but I wasn't angry. I was ecstatic about becoming a father. I actively participated in prenatal classes and witnessed Mary's birth. She turned out to be an easy baby, sleeping through the night and rarely fussing. I read to her every night, forging a strong bond. Karen allowed me to handle night feedings and diaper changes, but drew the line at breastfeeding assistance. Our sex life, while mostly vanilla, had occasional adventurous moments, especially after a few drinks. When I expressed my desire to write a children's book, Karen supported me throughout the months I spent on the computer. Finally completing The Man in the Tree, Karen liked it, but I felt it needed publication consideration. Submitting the book, I realized it was riddled with errors. Hiring Lisa, who worked at no cost, was a game changer. After her thorough revisions, the book improved significantly. Despite not making much money, it marked a promising start, with the publisher acknowledging my potential and assigning Lisa to refine my subsequent works. As I continued writing, my wife, a supportive gem, inquired about the progress one evening. Acknowledging the increased difficulty and slower pace, I hoped there was more than just one book in me. She suggested a night of fun to inspire new stories, playfully unbuttoning her top. Though I was working on a children's story, the idea of crafting a tale about a wife seducing her husband crossed my mind, and I began to chase her. "Easy, Tiger," she exclaimed as we sat around the kitchen table. "Right now I need to prepare Mary for bed. Why don't you pick a short book to read to her tonight? I have a feeling we'll be doing a lot of research later for your next story." After a delightful evening of tucking Mary in and turning off the lights, I found my wife lying on the bed. She wore something pink that covered almost nothing. Within 5 minutes it was on the floor, and Karen was straddling my waist. I did my best to keep things under control as she rode me for the first time in a while. We had 2 rounds, the first fueled by unbridled passion and the second by tender love. When I inquired if she was ready for more, she simply kissed me and said, "Not in your wildest dreams. Be happy with what you have." I chuckled and drifted off to sleep. As I progressed with my next story, I arranged to meet Lisa at my home around 4 hours in the afternoon. My classes usually ended by 3, and I'd be home by 4. I meticulously prepared my first 3 chapters, going through them to catch any obvious errors. However, my self-editing posed a challenge. I tended to read what I thought I had written, not what was on the paper. Lisa, at least 175 centimeters tall, joined me at the kitchen table. She flipped through the pages, making notes. It was then that I started to notice, or better yet, study her. She wasn't bony, but lacked any excess fat, with big brown eyes, decent breasts, and long legs. I guessed she was around 30, but I could be off by about 5 years. One thing that consistently intrigued me was her scent, a sweet yet musky fragrance that drove me crazy. As we discussed changes and flipped through chapters, I couldn't help but be captivated by Lisa's scent. It was warm, almost intimate, and I found myself taking deep breaths whenever she moved closer. By the 14th chapter, our monthly meetings had become more relaxed. I raised the temperature, lounging in shorts and a t-shirt, and noticed Lisa adopting a more casual attire too. Curiosity got the better of me, and I finally asked about her enchanting scent. Lisa surprised me, revealing she didn't wear perfume or deodorant. She hardly sweated and avoided chemicals. I suggested bottling her natural scent, finding it fantastic. We continued sitting together through all 24 chapters, transitioning from Diet Coke to glasses of wine during our proofreading sessions. Continued to breathe in her fragrance, my thoughts wandered to the taste, leading me into a troublesome situation. It all began with a casual hug, followed by a kiss on the cheek as we completed the first draft. I extended an invitation to dinner, including my wife. When Karen couldn't find a babysitter, she insisted we go without her. Concerned, my wife suggested taking Mary to our parents, but I dismissed the idea, convinced that our evening would be focused on business, with plans for a private night in a hot tub. We shared a kiss. I changed, and Lisa and I went out for dinner. I maintained the demeanor of a perfect gentleman until she asked me to dance. The slow song heightened my excitement, and as we danced, I found myself momentarily free from thoughts of Karen. Lisa's advances escalated on the dance floor, almost leading to intimacy. In her room later, I finally experienced the scent I had been captivated by for months. I explored every inch of her body, bringing her to climax multiple times. The next day, reality hit me, compounded by a text from her about our wonderful time together. Guilt consumed me, realizing the potential impact on marriages. Promising myself it wouldn't happen again, the Thanksgiving holiday provided a break. Lisa suggested finishing the last 2 chapters of the book at my house. I agreed, hoping to conclude the project and receive payment. I assured Karen that we would have a great holiday season with an extra couple of $1,000s. We started the work on Wednesday morning, making progress. As Lisa needed to use the bathroom, I felt a sense of accomplishment. However, when she returned, she proposed a celebration, revealing her nakedness. Despite my initial protest, she silenced me, and the next few hours blurred into a frenzy of passion. She confessed that the enticing smell I liked was a result of her playing erotic CDs during her drives. Afterward, we showered together, exchanged kisses at the door, and Lisa expressed interest in my future writing projects. After she left, I cleaned up, ventilated the room, and exchanged messages, asserting that our last encounter would not be repeated. I emphasized the unforgettable nature of the experience but declared my commitment to my wife and marriage. At the beginning of this year, while I was working in the garage, I received a text message on my phone, which was on the kitchen table. Karen was preparing Mary's lunch when the notification beeped, and she immediately grabbed the phone to read the message. In an instant, my life and marriage came to an end. The following 3 hours were filled with intense screaming and sobbing, leaving me no time to catch my breath. I wish I could say I was politely asked to leave, but the reality was that, for my safety, I hastily packed a bag and headed to a motel, accompanied only by my cell phone. That marked the abrupt end of my once happy life. Unfortunately, the message from Lisa was the catalyst that changed everything. For the next 2 months, I pleaded and cried, but my efforts were in vain. I was labeled a lying bastard, and Karen wanted nothing to do with me. Despite my desperate requests for a second chance and proposals for counseling, nothing swayed her. I even went to the extent of crawling on my knees, promising to do anything to win her back, but it was all futile. The reason for the divorce, written in bold letters, was adultery. I found a small apartment near my workplace and thought I had 90 days to convince Karen to reconsider. Her father, hearing a formidable lawyer, ensured that the legal proceedings were not in my favor. It was my fault for neglecting the documents, and I tried everything imaginable to halt the process. Even after Karen obtained a restraining order due to my incessant visits, I failed to rectify my life. I pledged to change and never repeat my mistakes. But Karen was adamant. She uttered, "I never want to see your lying face again." During our last hearing, she vowed to make my life a living hell, despite being a no-fault state. Adultery and having a minor child played a significant role in the division of everything. Karen retained the house and custody of Mary until she turned 18. I was burdened with alimony, child support, medical benefits, housing payments, and a life insurance policy with Mary as the beneficiary. My visits with Mary were strictly supervised due to the restraining order, and Karen fulfilled her promise of making my life miserable.
In her solitude, Karen questioned how Fred, of all people, could betray her. She recalled planning her marriage after escaping a controlling relationship with Ernest. Fred, initially her savior, was now the cause of her anguish. Despite her parents' and friends' pleas to give me another chance, Karen couldn't ignore the fear of reliving the past with Ernest.
Fueled by anger and hatred, Karen decided to make me pay for the pain I caused. She went on a mission to dismantle my life, turning our friends against me and tarnishing my reputation with everyone she could reach. She contacted the school board, my workplace, friends, family, and acquaintances, portraying me as a despicable person. By the end of it all, I was left broken and turned to alcohol to cope. My life spiraled out of control, and I struggled to function without a few drinks. The holidays only provided more opportunities to mess up my life. Despite the chaos, I managed to see Mary, but Karen warned me to do better or risk losing even that connection. I no longer saw Mary, and honestly, I didn't really care. I was likely too preoccupied. Over the course of 2.5 years, I transformed from a cheerful husband to a troubled alcoholic, on the verge of losing my job and teaching certificate. My entire family, except for my mother, had given up on me, considering me nothing more than a pitiful drunk. While my mother attempted to uplift me by reminding me that I still had a beautiful daughter to care for, I had reached a point where I had little regard for my own well-being. I vividly recall contemplating the idea of ending it all, waiting to crash into the metaphorical rocks below. Then, within 6 months, 2 significant events unfolded, altering my life for the better. On a typical Friday night, I was intoxicated as usual. My car resembled a trash heap, and as I reached for something on the seat, a sudden realization hit me. One moment, I was driving straight, and the next, I found myself airborne, descending down an embankment into a ravine. Had I worn a seatbelt? I couldn't remember. It had been ages since I bothered, hoping that one day the misery would end. As the car finally came to a halt against a large oak tree, my body collided with the windshield and steering wheel. The excruciating pain snapped me back to reality. Bleeding from my face or head, I struggled to comprehend the situation in the dark, with only the moon in the sky. Fortunately, my partially open window allowed me to escape the wreckage, though my body felt like it had been hit by a Mack truck. Crawling up the slope, I realized the extent of my injuries. My left leg, among other areas, was aching. It took considerable effort to reach the road. As the first car approached, I raised my hand, but the driver callously passed by. Frustrated, I braced myself for the next car, almost inviting it to hit me. To my surprise, it swerved at the last moment, narrowly avoiding me. Desperation set in as I lay there, anticipating the next headlights. Eventually, a pair stopped and I heard voices before losing consciousness. The next thing I knew, people were restraining me, and then everything went silent. It felt like I had died. "Mr. Aaron, can you hear me?" a voice said, promising to bring me back from heaven. Disoriented, I realized my hands and feet were tied. Confused and agitated, I questioned why I was bound. A man in a white suit assured me to calm down, offering to untie me or leave me bound. I chose to comply. Once freed, I observed my surroundings. A hospital room. The worst part was that I was completely sober. The doctor explained that I'd need a cane due to a badly bruised left leg. He mentioned calling my mother, who would be arriving soon. I muttered under my breath about a certain Karen who had called the night before. Upon my mother's arrival, she scolded me for jeopardizing lives through drinking and driving. Having heard it all before, I simply nodded. I was done with it all. The doctor assured me that pain relief would come soon, emphasizing that it was Sunday morning, and my mother had been contacted using the number from my wallet. "I could ask your father to leave his shotgun in your apartment, but if you agree, let's place it in the bathtub for easier cleanup later." She glanced at me before leaving. That was quite cold. The doctor agreed that it was good advice, but still cold. He left, and I was discharged on the same day. Despite my best efforts, I ended up with cuts, bruises, a sprained knee, and a few stitches. I caught a taxi home, hobbled up to my second-floor apartment, and took several painkillers. Sitting at the kitchen table, I washed down the first two with a sip of vodka. Surveying my humble home, I realized it looked like a mess, as if someone had shaken a box containing all my belongings and thrown it back on the floor. The situation felt like hitting rock bottom, but I believed that the only way was up. The next week was challenging, not just physically healing from injuries, but also facing a lack of sympathy from others, including my students. The general opinion was that the drunkard got what he deserved. The worst part was that I was sober, and the world didn't seem rosy. I couldn't stay home due to dealing with my weekend hangover. If I wanted to get paid, I had to work. Missing one more time could lead to firing. I got up, dressed, took a taxi to work, and repeated the process. No one wanted anything to do with me, as I was still seen as a worthless drunk and cheater. The following month was hell. The human body wasn't built to endure such suffering, and I lacked the time and money for rehab. I suffered 24 hours a day, or at least when I was awake. Karen constantly rode me because I had to rely on taxis to get to Mary, and my family had distanced themselves from me. Despite struggling alone, the bright side was no more supervised visits. Mary, being a child, was used to my prolonged absences. When she shared some of the things her mother said about me, it made me cringe. The worst part was that much of it was true. I aimed to see her once every 2 weeks. On a weekend when Karen was out of town, I was to spend time with Mary. Karen dropped her off at her parents' house, and I was supposed to pick her up. Her parting words were a plea for me to stay sober for once. I had a good relationship with Karen's parents, Susan and Aaron, down to Lisa. They didn't blame their daughter for divorcing me. The only harsh words came from Aaron, expressing his disappointment in my perceived lack of moral character. It hurt more than any scream. I called Aaron, explaining I would be late, but he kindly offered to give Mary a ride to my house, saving us both trouble. I waited on the sidewalk, confused when their car passed me without stopping. Susan seemed to be struggling with the steering wheel, and their car crashed into two others before hitting a taxi. I dialed 911 and rushed to the scene. Paramedics arrived quickly and I went to the hospital in one of the ambulances. Aaron had a heart attack, Susan suffered a broken arm and ribs, and Mary punctured her spleen, requiring surgery. I kept Karen updated by the hour until she arrived. When the doctor informed us that Mary was fine and out of danger, I felt immense relief. However, when I offered to donate blood for Mary, the doctor declined, mentioning something about positive and negative types. Confused, I was asked if I had ever done a DNA test. Puzzled, I wondered why I would need one, and the doctor suggested it was to confirm my relationship with Mary as her father. He took out a cotton swab and began running it along the... Inside my mouth, I questioned the purpose of this swab. I decided to use the same swab from Mary to conduct a DNA comparison with Mr. Aaron. Although it's possible I may be mistaken, I don't believe you are Mary's biological father, Mr. Aaron. In approximately 5 days, I will have the test results to confirm my suspicions. Leaving the room, I checked on Mary before exiting the hospital doors that night. Emotions overwhelmed me, and over the next 5 days, I experienced a mix of sadness and anger. Each day after work, I visited Mary, expecting her discharge by the week's end. I also took the time to see Karen's father, Aaron. As I entered the room, Karen angrily remarked about the situation, blaming me for the unfortunate events. "If you had your license, none of this would have happened," Karen snapped at me, expressing her disdain. She continued to berate me, expressing her anger at my alleged infidelity. Her words cut deep, leaving no room for forgiveness. I wished Aaron well before leaving the room, trying to escape Karen's harsh words. 5 days later, I found myself in the hospital, holding a document that would alter my life for both better and worse. Entering Mary's room, I refrained from disturbing her but left a kiss on her forehead. In Aaron's room, Karen greeted me with hostility. Handing her a copy of the document, I explained, "This, my dear Karen, is the hand of God." Confused, she demanded an explanation. I clarified that the paper indicated I am not Mary's biological father, raising my voice to emphasize the revelation. Karen reacted angrily, accusing me of being a cheater despite the evidence. I retorted, highlighting her own actions and warning of the impending consequences. Aaron intervened, urging Karen to restrain herself. I urged Karen to consider forgiveness for my past betrayal, suggesting a path toward reconciliation or an amicable divorce. However, I warned her that if she continued making my life difficult, I would seek retribution with determination. It seemed Karen was beginning to grasp the severity of the situation. I referenced the notion of divine retribution, suggesting that the consequences of her actions would come to haunt her. "I'm planning to hit you hard, Fred, and I'll savor every moment of it." Karen stuttered as she tried to explain, but I insisted she leave it be, assuring her that she'd have plenty of opportunities to regret it. For the first time in years, a smile crossed my face. "Fred, reconsider this. Think about Mary," Aaron pleaded. I turned to him, shrugged, and casually remarked that he should talk to someone who cares because I don't. With those words, I confidently exited the room, head held high. By the time I entered the taxi, my self-esteem had undergone a significant boost. I sought out the most ruthless attorney money could buy, someone who would go to extreme lengths to win his case. By the time I finished recounting my story, he was practically salivating. "Do I have a case against my ex, Fred?" I inquired. His first question caught me off guard, asking how far I was willing to go. Puzzled, I responded, not comprehending the simplicity of the question. He warned that tying his hands later wouldn't be pleasant and pressed me. "How far do you want to go?" I clarified, expressing my desire for her to pay and suffer, as she had made me suffer for the past 2 years. He assured me it would be costly, but he'd ensure I recovered every last penny. During our hour-long conversation, he provided a list of items to pack, and for the first time in a while, I felt a sense of excitement. 2 weeks were sufficient to document everything. The attorney advised an annulment of the marriage, citing evidence that Mary was conceived with another man before our wedding. He had already dispatched the necessary documents to the church and local archdiocese, confident they wouldn't deny use given the overwhelming evidence. When I inquired about the timeline, he estimated slightly over a month, emphasizing that Karen's parents' ties to the church might expedite the process. But if there was no marriage, there could be no divorce. The lawyer proposed going after alimony, child support, and the house, still essentially half mine after annulling the marriage. I was advised to return to the house, especially since I was still making payments. Eager to start, I signed the papers with a wide grin. The attorney added that he had accused Karen of fraud and intended to seek reimbursement from Mary's real father for the expenses incurred since her birth. He suspected Ernest, her ex-boyfriend, who was now married. When Karen called in distress, I allowed her to speak to my lawyer, hanging up on her twice more. My mother confronted me, having heard about my intentions from Aaron and Susan. She questioned my decision to annul the marriage, and I revealed Karen's deceit about Mary's paternity. Despite my past mistakes, I implored her to stay out of my life, expressing my anger and frustration. Ending the call with my mother, I relished the moment. The annulment was unprecedented in the diocese, and even the bishop couldn't dispute the undeniable facts. Karen had lied, entering the marriage under false pretenses. Realizing that the child she was carrying wasn't mine, he suggested to the cardinal that this should be approved. Just over a month later, the Catholic Church declared my marriage null and void, meaning, in the eyes of God, the marriage never occurred. With this obstacle cleared, Fred, we can proceed to the second step, which is to annul your divorce and restore your well-being. Regardless of the outcome, I am convinced that I will never be whole again. That was certain. With all the necessary documents, a lawsuit was filed in court to annul the divorce, terminate and refund her alimony and child support. Additionally, I sought compensation from the biological father for the financial support provided to Mary throughout the years. I also accused Karen of intentionally committing marriage fraud. Although things were about to turn unpleasant this time, I was not as emotional as before. I was relieved that Karen chose the same lawyer she used last time. Martin and I shared drinks after filing everything in court. Fred, you seem like a decent guy who got taken for a ride and humiliated last time. But if you go through with this, you'll probably hate yourself in the future. Now I hate myself? So what's the matter? I cheated, admitted it, and paid a price 10 times as much. If she had just come clean when she knew Mary wasn't mine, we could probably have worked things out. It wouldn't have been easy, but at that time I would have forgiven anything to get her back. Do you know what it's like to have everything 1 minute and nothing the next? I drank to numb the pain, but no matter how much I drank, it was still there. Now I'm sober, and the pain is still there. It's time to make it go away. It might cost me everything, but I can't continue like this. Does this make any sense to you? You did everything you could to destroy him, almost cutting off his reproductive organs. You probably would have done it if you could. That bastard cheated on me, she screamed. What the hell did you do with him? You got pregnant and gave him someone else's child to raise. What the hell do you think he was going to do when he found out? He's going to come at you with everything and try to execute you the same way you executed him. But this time, you have more to lose than him. Last time you were a poor little hurt wife and mother. This time you will be the devious, cheating Karen. Listen to your father. He knows what he's talking about. The lawyer supported Aaron. I might lose, but he'll never see Mary again. Never. Can you hear me? She shouted at the two of them. How will it hurt him? Mary is not his biological child, but Mary loves him to death. He is the only father she has ever known. Karen, you were wrong before, and you are wrong now. You just can't see it through all your hatred. The cancellation of the divorce was inevitable with the annulment of the marriage. There was no divorce. Alimony was immediately canceled with the DNA report. My child support was suspended, and I was given back the title to my own home. The next couple of things got a little more challenging. I was unable to collect child support from Karen, but her ex-boyfriend Ernest was tested and proven to be Mary's biological father. He was unhappy about this, as was his wife. Ernest said he had no idea he had gotten Karen pregnant. It happened on the night of her hen party. She was drunk. He was drunk. And although he didn't quite remember what happened, they must have done it in the back seat of his car. Karen swore and called Ernest a bastard in open court. I was warned that any further disruption could lead to a contempt of court charge. Ernest was instructed to provide full compensation to me and child support for Mary. Proving the fraudulent nature of the marriage was challenging. Karen faced potential imprisonment if convicted. Concerned about Mary, I couldn't allow Karen to face actual prison time even if she were found guilty, the judge stated, addressing everyone. I quietly communicated with my lawyer, expressing readiness to drop the charge under specific conditions. My lawyer proposed certain conditions for dropping the charge, I shared. Karen simply needs to reach out to those she has spoken ill of about my client and confess to cheating, getting pregnant, and passing off someone else's child as his. That's all we ask, in addition to Fred returning to his home. Karen vehemently objected, claiming she'd rather face hell than comply. The judge, left with no choice, declared the continuation of the charges. Emotions ran high as we left his office, with Karen seething and glaring at me. A cooling-off period was suggested until Tuesday morning at 9 or Salmba, urging all parties to find a fair compromise. The judge instructed Mr. Aaron not to return to his former residence until then. Back at the negotiation table, my lawyer and Karen's lawyer revisited compromises. If no agreement was reached, my lawyer warned of pursuing the maximum penalty. That day, Martin and I outlined our demands. I wanted Karen to contact my 12 ex-friends and 3 school administrators, and I requested visitation with Mary every other weekend. Despite the challenges, I cared for Mary, even though her mother was a source of resentment. The demand to return to the house was explained as a means to upset Karen, though I admitted my current inclination was to make it all go away. The house's sale and division of proceeds were proposed, despite my ongoing payments on it for the past 2.5 years. Martin emailed these suggestions to Karen's lawyer. Over the weekend, I focused on relaxation and healing, staying sober. In the quiet of Monday morning, I grappled with regret and reflected on the choices that led to this situation. I acknowledged my own weaknesses and realized blaming writing books and meeting Lisa was an excuse. Karen, despite her actions, had been a great wife and mother. The reality of my responsibility sank in, and the consequences of my actions were apparent. Both books continued to sell, and royalties accumulated in my escrow account. I turned on my laptop, typed for hours, and reflected on the past. A sense of responsibility lingered, and the path to resolution seemed daunting. I began working and decided to let go of everything, except for selling the house so that I could provide Mary with a place to stay until it gets sold. Despite doubts and exhaustion, I wanted the ordeal to end. I skipped the court appearance on Tuesday, and the final charge was dropped, closing the case. My family tried reaching out, but I wasn't ready to reconnect, although Karen, through my lawyer, sent a message thanking me for showing some humanity. I never replied. 10 years ago, after selling the house, I bought a Chevrolet and a small apartment, finally finding some stability. Karen allowed me to see Mary weekly, and for the next 6 months I worked on rebuilding our strained relationship. It's an ongoing process, not without its challenges, but I'm making an effort. I keep busy and consume too much coffee, as my dentist often reminds me. Out of the blue, Lisa apologized via text. I responded in kind but maintained my distance. Keeping occupied was my only way to heal. One evening, Lisa informed me she was sorry, and I reciprocated without delving deeper. Staying busy was my method of healing. After 6 p.m., Karen returned home from work on a particularly challenging day. She just wanted to unwind, taking off her shoes as she retrieved the mail. To her surprise, a large brown bag, devoid of any return address, dominated the mailbox. John grabbed it, making her way back to the house. Dumping everything on the counter, she opted for a cold white wine, then opened the package. Amidst the usual junk, she found a book. As Mary arrived asking about dinner, John, absorbed in the book, barely registered her daughter's presence. Observing her mother's tears, Mary grew concerned. Without responding immediately, John eventually hugged Mary, expressing her love. The lipstick stain on Mary's cheek drew a light moment. After dinner preparations, John remained silent, lost in her thoughts. The book on the counter captivated her attention throughout the evening. While Mary chatted animatedly, John only half listened. Mary went to bed, and John continued reading, with tears staining the pages. She contemplated calling in sick the next day, and, with the light still on, drifted off to sleep. If not for Mary's noise, John might have slept longer. The next morning, John felt unwell and decided to take the day off, leaving a message for her colleague Carol. The book on the bedside table caught her eye, and she read the dedication, bringing tears to her eyes. The first paragraph resonated with her, acknowledging personal faults. The author regretted losing a once wonderful family and hoped to prevent others from making similar mistakes. The story unfolded, recounting a failed marriage and the impact of a book, The Man in the Tree. The author admitted that writing the book contributed to the demise of the marriage. Despite the emotional turmoil, John found solace in the author's words and agreed that nobody wins in such situations.
This is the end of the story. We will be interested to hear your opinion in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like it. Good luck.